They thought the children's laughter would fade into silence, swallowed by the poison seeping into the earth beneath their swings and slides. They thought no one would stand against a corporation with lawyers and endless money. They were wrong. 150 motorcycles would soon thunder into their world, and nothing would ever be the same. The playground sat at the edge of Riverside, a worn patch of dusty grass and rusted equipment where the forgotten children of the working poor came to play. Swings creaked in the autumn wind, their chains orange with oxidation. Slides gleamed dully under the weak afternoon sun, and beneath it all, hidden in the soil, deadly chemicals leached upward, invisible fingers reaching for small hands and bare feet. Nobody had noticed. Not at first. The factory loomed 3 blocks away, its smokestacks punching holes in the sky, its loading docks rumbling with diesel trucks. Meridian Chemical Industries had operated there for 47 years, manufacturing industrial solvents and degreasing agents. What they'd been doing with their waste was another matter entirely. Eva Kowalczyk noticed first. 73 years old, arthritis gnarling her fingers like old tree roots. She walked her granddaughter to that playground every day after school. Little Zara, 8 years old with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, loved the swings most of all. She'd pump her legs, flying higher and higher, her laughter cutting through the gray weight of the neighborhood like sunlight through storm clouds. But Zara had been getting sick, headaches that made her cry in the night, nosebleeds that stained her pillowcases, a rash that spread across her small hands, angry and weeping, that no cream could cure. Eva had fought in battles before. Born in Warsaw, raised in the rubble of war, she'd survived things that would break softer souls. She'd come to America with nothing but determination and a suitcase held together with rope. She'd raised 3 children while working 2 jobs. She'd buried a husband she'd loved for 51 years. She knew suffering. She knew injustice. And she knew, with the certainty of bones grown brittle, but spirit still fierce, that something was poisoning her granddaughter. She began asking questions. Other grandmothers, other mothers, other fathers nodded with recognition and grief. 12 children from the neighborhood had developed similar symptoms: headaches, rashes, chronic nosebleeds. One little boy, just 6 years old, had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. The doctors couldn't explain it, but Eva had her suspicions. The factory squatted in the distance like a malevolent toad, its walls streaked with decades of grime. She'd watched trucks come and go in the dead of night, watched the way the grass died in certain patterns near the back fence, watched how nothing grew in the vacant lot between the factory and the playground, a wasteland of bare earth and stunted weeds. Eva took soil samples in old mason jars, her arthritic hands struggling with the trowel. She labeled them carefully in her precise European script. She walked them to the community college 20 blocks away, her bad hip aching with every step, and begged a young chemistry professor to test them, please, for the children. He'd looked at her weathered face, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and he'd agreed. The results came back 3 weeks later. Trichloroethylene, benzene, heavy metals, concentrations that made the young professor's face go pale. Levels that were 40 times the safe limit. Poison, pure and simple. The soil was saturated with it, seeping from underground storage tanks that had been leaking for years, maybe decades. Eva took the results to the city council. She stood at the podium, her voice shaking but clear, her English still flavored with the accent of her homeland, and she told them what was happening. The councilors listened with polite, distant faces. They thanked her for her concerns. They promised to look into it, but their eyes were already sliding away, already moving to the next item on the agenda. She went to the newspapers. A junior reporter came, took notes, took pictures of the playground, of the factory in the distance. The story ran on page 12 of the local section, buried beneath advertisements for tire sales and furniture liquidations. 63 words. They'd cut her quotes down to nothing. She tried the television stations. They didn't return her calls. She tried the health department. They sent a form letter explaining the complaint process would take 6 to 8 months. She tried calling Meridian Chemical Industries directly. She was transferred 7 times, left on hold for 43 minutes, and finally disconnected. Eva Kowalczyk was one old woman with arthritic hands and limited English. She had no money for lawyers. She had no connections to power. She had nothing but her love for her granddaughter and her fury at the injustice of it all. But she did have one thing the corporation hadn't counted on. She had a neighbor named Thorne. Thorne lived 3 doors down in a narrow house with a dead lawn and a motorcycle that gleamed like violence in the driveway. He was 56, broad-shouldered, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories he never spoke aloud. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His beard was shot through with gray. He wore leather-like armor and spoke in low rumbles that made people step back instinctively. He'd noticed Eva walking past with her mason jars. He'd noticed the worry etched deeper into her face each day. He'd noticed Zara growing paler, thinner, her laughter fading. And one evening, as Eva struggled with her gait, the arthritis making her fingers clumsy, he'd walked over and asked what was wrong. She'd told him everything. Standing there in the dying light, with the factory's smokestacks bleeding darkness into the sunset, she'd poured out her fear and her rage and her helplessness. She'd shown him the test results. She'd told him about the sick children. She'd told him how no one would listen, how no one cared, how a corporation could poison babies and face no consequences because they had money and lawyers and power. Thorne had listened, really listened. His jaw had tightened. His hands had clenched. And when she finished, he'd said just 4 words. "I'll make some calls." Eva hadn't known what that meant. She'd thanked him politely, expecting nothing, expecting only the same empty promises everyone else had offered. She didn't know that Thorne was sergeant-at-arms of the Riverside chapter of the Hells Angels. She didn't know that he'd served 23 years in the Marines before he'd come home broken and angry and looking for brotherhood. She didn't know that the leather he wore bore patches that commanded respect in every roadhouse and rally from coast to coast. She didn't know that when men like Thorne made calls, the world shifted on its axis. Within 48 hours, the word had spread. Through networks built on loyalty and blood and shared roads, the message traveled. Children were being poisoned. A corporation was getting away with murder. An old woman who'd survived the ruins of Warsaw was fighting alone. And something needed to be done. The response was immediate, overwhelming, thunderous. Chapters from 6 states mobilized. Men and women who'd served their country, who'd raised families, who'd buried brothers and sisters, who understood in their bones what it meant to protect the innocent. They cleared their schedules. They fueled their bikes. They called in favors from lawyers and journalists and activists who owed them. They prepared to ride. The corporation had no idea what was coming. Meridian Chemical Industries was a subsidiary of a larger conglomerate, cushioned by insurance and legal teams and public relations consultants. They'd handled complaints before. Fines were just the cost of doing business. Lawsuits could be settled quietly, buried under non-disclosure agreements. They'd calculated the risk and found it acceptable. The playground was in a poor neighborhood. The affected families had no resources. The story had barely made the news. This would blow over. It always did. But Meridian's regional manager, a man named Douglas Penfield who wore expensive suits and sprayed cologne that cost more than Eva's monthly rent, hadn't planned on Thorne. He hadn't planned on 150 motorcycles converging on his corporate offices like a storm made of chrome and fury. He hadn't planned on the media attention that would follow, cameras and microphones drawn to the spectacle like moths to flame. Saturday morning dawned cold and clear. Eva stood at her kitchen window, watching Zara sleep on the couch, the little girl's breathing shallow, her skin pale against the worn cushions. Outside, the first rumble of engines began to echo through the streets, low at first, distant, then growing, multiplying, a sound like rolling thunder, like the earth itself growling in anger. Motorcycles appeared around the corner. 1, 5, 20, 50, more. They kept coming, an endless river of chrome and leather, of American iron and battle-scarred riders. They lined the streets, parked in perfect formation, their engines idling in synchronous rhythm. Men and women dismounted, their movements coordinated, purposeful. They wore cuts decorated with patches that told of brotherhood, of chapters spanning the continent, of allegiance to something bigger than themselves. Eva stepped outside, her breath catching. The cold air bit at her lungs. The thunder of engines vibrated through her chest. She saw Thorne walking toward her, flanked by two other riders. One was a woman with silver hair braided down her back, her face weathered by sun and wind. The other was a massive man with hands like sledgehammers and eyes that held surprising gentleness. "Eva," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the rumble. "We're going to fix this." Tears blurred her vision. She tried to speak, but couldn't find words. Instead, she nodded, her arthritic fingers clutching the porch railing. "We brought some people you need to meet," Thorne continued. He gestured to a group standing near the lead bikes. Eva saw a woman in a sharp blazer, professional and fierce, who introduced herself as Catherine Lang, environmental attorney. Next to her stood a man with camera equipment, a documentary filmmaker who'd won awards for exposing corporate malfeasance. Behind them, a small army of volunteers with clipboards and testing equipment, ready to document everything with scientific precision. "We're going to the factory," the silver-haired woman said. Her name was Raven, and she spoke with the authority of someone who'd led battalions. "We're going to make sure they can't ignore this anymore. You want to come?" Eva looked back through her window at Zara, still sleeping, still sick, still suffering. She looked at the playground visible down the street, empty now, the swings hanging motionless like broken promises. She looked at the riders surrounding her, 150 strong, united in purpose. She nodded. "Yes, I'm coming." The ride to Meridian Chemical Industries was like nothing Eva had ever experienced. She sat behind Raven, clinging to the woman's waist, feeling the power of the motorcycle beneath her, feeling the thunder of 149 other bikes surrounding her like a protective wall. The sound was deafening, glorious. A declaration of war. They pulled into the factory's parking lot in formation, surrounding the building, blocking every entrance and exit. Corporate employees stared from windows, their faces pale. Security guards spoke urgently into radios, clearly overwhelmed, clearly unprepared for this. Douglas Penfield emerged from the main entrance, flanked by two lawyers and a security director. He was 52, well-fed, his suit Italian, his shoes gleaming. His face was red with fury and fear, a dangerous combination. "You can't be here," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is private property. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Thorne said, stepping forward. Behind him, the riders formed up in silent ranks, a wall of leather and resolve. "Call them. Call the news, too. Let's make this real public." As if on cue, news vans appeared at the edge of the property. The documentary filmmaker had tipped them off. Cameras emerged, lenses focusing, red lights blinking. Reporters scrambled for position. Catherine Lang, the attorney, stepped forward with a briefcase. "Mr. Penfield, I represent the Riverside Community Coalition and 12 families whose children have been poisoned by chemicals leaking from your facility. We have soil test results, medical records, and expert testimony. We're filing a class action lawsuit, and we're requesting an immediate injunction to halt all operations until a full environmental assessment can be completed." Penfield's face cycled through emotions: anger, calculation, dismissal. "Those accusations are baseless. We comply with all regulations. This is harassment." "Is it?" Raven's voice cut like a blade. She held up a thick folder. "We've got records of your midnight disposal runs. We've got testimony from former employees about those underground tanks that haven't been inspected in 20 years. We've got satellite imagery showing contamination patterns. You've been poisoning children, and you knew it." The cameras caught everything. Penfield's face, the massive gathering of bikers, Eva standing small but fierce beside these unexpected defenders, the factory looming behind them like a monument to greed. The reporters asked questions, rapid fire, each one more damaging than the last. "Is it true children have been hospitalized? How long have you known about the contamination? Will Meridian take responsibility? Are you prepared to face criminal charges?" Penfield stammered, his prepared corporate talking points crumbling. His lawyers whispered urgently in his ears. The security director looked at the sea of bikers and wisely kept his distance. Then, Eva stepped forward. Small, old, fragile in appearance, but iron in spirit. The cameras swung to her. "My granddaughter is 8 years old," she said, her accent thick but her words clear. "She cannot sleep because of headaches. She has rashes on her hands. She is sick because your poison is in the ground where she plays. You care more about money than babies. You should be ashamed." The silence that followed was profound. Even the motorcycle engines had been cut, leaving only the whisper of cold wind. Eva's words hung in the air, undeniable, devastating in their simple truth. The footage would go viral within hours. An elderly immigrant grandmother standing up to a heartless corporation, flanked by an army of bikers who'd come to her defense. The story had everything: injustice, drama, unexpected heroes, and the most powerful element of all, children in danger. By evening, every major news outlet had picked it up. The factory's parent company's stock dropped 7%. Activist groups mobilized protests at corporate headquarters in 3 cities. Politicians, sensing opportunity, called for investigations. The Environmental Protection Agency announced an emergency response. The state attorney general opened a criminal inquiry. Meridian Chemical Industries tried to control the damage. They released statements promising full cooperation. They hired crisis management consultants. They offered to fund community health screenings. But the damage was done. The poison was out, and not just the chemicals in the ground. Within 3 days, operations at the facility were suspended pending investigation. Within a week, the EPA confirmed massive contamination requiring immediate remediation. Within 2 weeks, 12 executives were subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. Within a month, the company agreed to a settlement that would fund complete soil replacement at the playground, comprehensive health monitoring for affected children, and substantial financial compensation for families. The total settlement reached $14 million. Every child received full medical coverage through adulthood. The playground was demolished and rebuilt on clean soil trucked in from quarries upstate, with new equipment that gleamed in the sunlight like hope made tangible. The factory was ordered to install new containment systems and submit to unannounced inspections in perpetuity. Douglas Penfield and 3 other executives were indicted on criminal charges of reckless endangerment and environmental crimes. 2 would eventually serve prison time. Penfield lost everything: his job, his reputation, his freedom. He learned, far too late, that there were some sins money couldn't absolve. But the most profound changes happened quietly, in moments too small for cameras to capture. Zara's headaches faded. Her rashes healed. Color returned to her cheeks. She laughed again, really laughed, the sound bright and clear and unbroken. Eva stood at the new playground's opening ceremony, watching her granddaughter swing higher and higher. No fear of poison beneath her feet. The little girl's joy was unburdened now, pure as it should have been all along. Thorne stood beside Eva, along with Raven and 50 other riders who'd returned for the ceremony. They'd raised additional funds for the playground, enough to include a community garden and a small memorial listing the names of every child who'd been affected. Never forget, never again. "Thank you," Eva whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached up and took Thorne's scarred hand in her arthritic one. "You saved them." "No," Thorne said, his rough voice gentle. "You saved them. You fought when no one else would. You refused to give up. We just made sure the world had to pay attention." The new playground sprawled across clean earth, its equipment colorful and safe, its surface cushioned with rubber made from recycled tires. Children who'd been sick now played with abandon, their voices rising in the cold autumn air like music. Families who'd been helpless now watched with relief and gratitude. A community that had been poisoned now healed, slowly but surely. The bikers stayed for the ceremony. They watched the children play. They spoke with the families. They took pictures beside the memorial. And when they finally mounted their motorcycles and fired the engines, the thunder that rolled through the neighborhood wasn't threatening anymore. It was a promise, protection, brotherhood extending beyond blood to encompass anyone who needed defenders. Eva watched them ride away, one by one, then in groups, finally in a long line that stretched down the street, like a river of chrome and purpose. She waved until the last bike disappeared around the corner. Then she turned back to the playground, to Zara swinging high and fearless, to the other children running and laughing and living. Justice had come, not from courts or politicians or corporations doing the right thing voluntarily. Justice had come on motorcycles, carried by people who understood that protecting the innocent was the only cause that mattered. Justice had come because one old woman refused to be silent, and because a community of riders refused to let her fight alone. The poison was gone. The guilty had been punished. The children were healing. And Eva Kowalczyk, 73 years old with arthritic hands and an unbreakable spirit, knew with absolute certainty that she lived in a world where good people still existed, where brotherhood meant something, where the roar of motorcycles could be the sound of hope arriving. She walked to the swings and gently pushed Zara higher. The little girl squealed with delight, her small hands gripping the chains, her feet reaching for the sky. Clean sky above clean ground. Safe, protected, loved. Sometimes, justice comes quietly through proper channels. Sometimes it requires forms and procedures and endless patience. But sometimes when children are suffering and the powerful refuse to listen and hope is fading, sometimes justice comes on 150 motorcycles. Thundering and undeniable, impossible to ignore. And in the end, that's exactly what Riverside needed. Not bureaucracy, not empty promises, but the raw, beautiful force of people who refuse to stand by while the innocent suffer. People who answer the call when someone needs defending. People who understand that family isn't always blood, but is always worth fighting for. The playground rang with laughter. The soil was clean. The children were safe. And somewhere out on the highway, engines rumbled toward the next fight, toward whoever needed them next. Because that's what brotherhood meant. Not might making right, but might defending right. Always. Without question. Without hesitation. Forever. If you have enjoyed this story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.